The courtroom fell silent as my mother's words sliced through the air. "Your Honor, my daughter has always been unstable." My fingers dug into the polished oak of the defendant's table until my knuckles turned white. The sensation of something hot and liquid pooled in my stomach, rising into my chest as she continued. "She can barely hold down a job, she's been in and out of therapy, and frankly, I don't think she should have custody of my grandson at all." Across the aisle, my ex-husband Victor's lips curled into that familiar smirk. It was the same one he'd worn when telling me I'd never amount to anything. His expensive lawyer nodded along with my mother's devastating testimony, their synchronized movements confirming what I'd suspected. This ambush had been carefully orchestrated. 8-year-old Oliver sat in the front row beside my sister Natalie. His dark eyes were wide with confusion as he watched his grandmother systematically destroy his mother's character. The pale band where my wedding ring had rested for 15 years seemed to pulse under the harsh fluorescent lights. It was a ghostly reminder of promises broken. "My name is Olivia, I'm 39, and I discovered that family loyalty has its limits when my own mother stood up at my ex-husband's custody hearing and called me an unfit parent. She lives in some tiny apartment downtown," my mother pressed on, her voice growing stronger as she warmed to her theme. "Drives an old car, can barely afford Oliver's school supplies. Meanwhile, Victor has a beautiful home in the suburbs, a stable income, and the ability to provide the kind of life every child deserves." Judge Patricia Manning sat behind the bench, her expression neutral as she listened to the testimony. She was a colleague I'd known for over a decade, someone who understood the demands of our profession, but she gave no sign of recognition. She maintained the impartial demeanor required of her position. I had specifically requested her through the proper channels when the custody case was filed 3 months ago. I knew she would remain impartial despite our professional relationship. "Furthermore," my mother said, reaching her crescendo, "Olivia has always been secretive about her so-called work. She claims to have some important job, but she won't tell us what she actually does. For all we know, she could be involved in something illegal, something that would put my grandson in danger." The courtroom buzzed with murmured agreement. Victor's family filled the left side of the gallery, all nodding along with my mother's character assassination. My side was nearly empty, save for a few friends who'd taken time off work to support me. These were people who actually knew what I did for a living. For 15 years, I'd maintained this careful separation between my personal and professional lives. Not out of shame, but out of a desire for normalcy. I wanted Oliver to have a childhood defined by who he was, not by who his mother was. I'd chosen modest clothes, a practical car, a life without ostentation or pretense. And now, that very modesty was being weaponized against me by the woman who should have been my strongest defender. As I watched my mother's performance, and it was a performance, I thought about the countless nights I'd spent reviewing case files while Oliver slept down the hall. The morning meetings I'd rescheduled to attend his school events, the delicate balance I'd maintained between my responsibilities to the state and my duties as a mother. All of it dismissed with a wave of my mother's hand as she labeled me unstable and secretive. Victor's lawyer, James Coleman, stood to address the court. "Your Honor, we believe the testimony clearly shows that the child's best interests would be served by awarding full custody to my client. The mother's inability to provide basic stability, combined with her secretive behavior regarding her employment, raises serious concerns about her fitness as a parent." I remained silent, my hands now folded calmly in front of me, watching this orchestrated attack unfold. 15 years of judicial experience had taught me the importance of timing, of letting others reveal themselves fully before showing your hand. "Ms. Lawrence," Judge Manning addressed me directly, "how do you respond to these allegations about your employment and your ability to provide for your son?" I stood slowly, my movements deliberate and controlled. The weight of the moment settled in my chest. This wasn't just about custody anymore. This was about truth, about letting the masks fall away. "Your Honor, I'd like to call a witness to address those concerns." Victor's lawyer looked confused. "Your Honor, we weren't notified of any witnesses." "The witness wasn't available until this morning," I replied calmly, "but I believe his testimony will clarify any questions about my employment status." Judge Manning nodded. Very well. Please call your witness. I walked to the courtroom doors and opened them. A tall man in an impeccable dark suit entered, his silver hair perfectly styled, his bearing commanding immediate respect. The gallery fell completely silent. Your Honor, I said, my voice carrying clearly through the suddenly quiet courtroom, I'd like to call Chief Justice William Tanner to the stand. The gasp that went through the courtroom was audible. My mother's face transformed from confident to confused to horrified as the Chief Justice of the State Supreme Court walked to the witness stand. Victor dropped his pen, his jaw slackening as recognition dawned. Chief Justice Tanner, I began, my voice taking on the professional tone that had served me well for 15 years. Could you please identify me for the court? The Chief Justice looked directly at me, his voice formal but warm. You are the Honorable Olivia Lawrence, Associate Justice of the State Supreme Court, where you have served with distinction for the past 8 years. The silence in the courtroom was deafening. I could hear my mother's sharp intake of breath, could see Victor's lawyer frantically shuffling through papers. And Chief Justice Tanner, I continued, could you describe the nature of my work responsibilities? Justice Lawrence presides over some of our most complex civil and criminal cases, he replied. She sits on our appellate panel for death penalty cases, chairs our Judicial Ethics Committee, and has written several landmark decisions regarding family law and child welfare. Oliver's eyes were wide with amazement as he finally understood why his mother had to work late so many evenings, why she sometimes disappeared into her study with thick legal briefs, why she spoke with such authority about fairness and justice. One more question, Chief Justice, I said. Could you address the allegations about my financial stability? He smiled slightly. Justice Lawrence earns a salary of $195,000 annually, plus benefits. She owns her downtown apartment, a penthouse actually, and maintains a vacation home in the mountains. Her financial disclosure forms are part of the public record as required for all sitting judges. I turned to face the courtroom where my mother sat with her mouth hanging open, her carefully constructed testimony crumbling around her. Victor stared at me as if seeing me for the first time. The woman he'd married, lived with for 6 years, and never truly known. Your Honor, I addressed Judge Manning, I'd like to explain to the court why my family was unaware of my position. Judge Manning nodded, clearly intrigued. 8 years ago, when I was confirmed to the State Supreme Court, I made the decision to keep my professional life separate from my personal relationships. This wasn't because I was ashamed of my work, quite the opposite. It was because I wanted my son to have a normal childhood without the pressure and scrutiny that comes with being a judge's child. I looked at Oliver, whose face showed a mixture of pride and confusion. I chose to live modestly, to drive a practical car, to shop at regular stores rather than high-end boutiques. I wanted Oliver to understand the value of hard work and humility, not to grow up entitled because of his mother's position. Victor was staring at me as if he'd never seen me before. During our marriage, he'd constantly criticized my boring job at the courthouse, never bothering to ask about the details of my work, never questioning why I worked such long hours or brought home complex legal briefs. The reason I'm often unavailable for extended periods, I continued, is because I'm presiding over complex cases that can last weeks or months. The reason I couldn't always attend school events is because I was writing legal decisions that affect thousands of families across our state. Chief Justice Tanner spoke up. If I may add, Your Honor, Justice Lawrence has one of the finest legal minds I've encountered in 30 years on the bench. Her decisions have been upheld by federal courts, and she's been recognized nationally for her work in family law. I walked back to the defendant's table, but I wasn't a defendant anymore. I was what I'd always been, a sitting judge with 15 years of legal experience and a reputation for fairness and integrity. Your Honor, I said to Judge Manning, I've spent my entire career protecting children and families. I've written decisions that have removed children from abusive homes, that have ensured fair custody arrangements, that have put child welfare above all other considerations. The courtroom was completely silent now, the weight of revelation hanging in the air. Now, the allegation that I'm somehow unfit to care for my own son is not only false, It's insulting to every family I've protected and every child whose interests I've safeguarded from this very bench. I turned to look at my mother, who had gone pale, the woman who had raised me, who should have known me best, who had just attempted to take my child away based on assumptions and prejudice. What's particularly painful is that these allegations come from people who never bothered to ask about my work, who never showed interest in my career, who assumed the worst without seeking the truth. Victor's lawyer was clearly scrambling. Your Honor, we had no knowledge of what? I interrupted. Of the fact that your client was married to a sitting state Supreme Court justice for 6 years and never bothered to learn what she actually did for a living? Judge Manning leaned forward. Mr. Coleman, did your client not know his wife's profession during their marriage? Victor finally found his voice, stammering. She said she worked at the courthouse. I thought she was a clerk or something. The absurdity of it hung in the air like a toxic cloud. I'd been married to a man who'd assumed I was a courthouse clerk for 6 years. He'd never questioned why I worked such long hours, why I brought home complex legal briefs, why I sometimes had to travel for judicial conferences. Your Honor, I said, addressing Judge Manning directly, I'd like to submit my judicial performance evaluations, my financial disclosure forms, and my custody evaluation report prepared by Dr. Sandra Williams, a court-appointed child psychologist. Judge Manning reviewed the documents quickly. Dr. Williams rated you as an exemplary parent with strong bonds to your child and no concerns regarding your ability to provide care and guidance. I looked around the courtroom one final time, at my mother who couldn't meet my eyes, at my sister who looked ashamed, at my ex-husband who was staring at the floor, at Oliver, who was looking at me with new understanding and pride. Your Honor, I said, my voice growing stronger with conviction. I'm requesting full physical custody of my son with supervised visitation for the father, pending his completion of co-parenting classes. I'm also requesting that all future custody discussions be handled without the involvement of extended family members who have demonstrated a willingness to provide false testimony. Judge Manning nodded grimly. Given the evidence presented and the concerning testimony provided by the defendant's mother, I'm granting full custody to Justice Lawrence. Visitation for the father will be supervised for the next 6 months, with the possibility of revision pending successful completion of court-ordered parenting classes. As the courtroom began to empty, Oliver ran to me, wrapping his arms around my waist. Mom, why didn't you tell me you were a judge? He whispered. I knelt down to his level. Because I wanted you to love me for being your mom, not because of my job. I think it's cool, he said, grinning. Does this mean you can send people to jail? Sometimes, I admitted, but mostly I help families figure out how to take care of each other. My mother approached hesitantly, her earlier confidence completely gone. Olivia, I had no idea. I'm so sorry. I stood up, my arm around Oliver's shoulders. Mom, you testified under oath that I was an unfit parent without knowing anything about my life, my career, or my capabilities. You were willing to destroy my relationship with my son based on assumptions and prejudice. Her eyes filled with tears. I thought I was helping. Victor said what he needed to say to get custody, I interrupted, and you believed him instead of your own daughter. The courtroom was nearly empty now, just family members and a few lingering observers. For 15 years, you've asked what I do for work, and I've given you vague answers because I wanted privacy. But you never pressed, never showed real interest. You assumed that because I didn't brag about my achievements, I didn't have any. I looked at my sister Natalie, who was crying quietly in the front row. I became a judge at 31, one of the youngest in state history. I've written decisions that are taught in law schools. I've protected thousands of children and families. I've dedicated my life to justice and fairness. Chief Justice Tanner, who had been waiting respectfully in the gallery, approached me. Olivia, I hope this experience doesn't discourage you from continuing your excellent work. Thank you, Chief Justice, I replied. If anything, it's reminded me why our work is so important. As we walked out of the courthouse, Oliver holding my hand, I realized that this painful experience had taught me something valuable. I'd spent so much energy protecting my son from the potential complications of my position that I'd hidden who I really was from the people who should have known me best. But more importantly, I'd learned that respect earned through assumption is worthless, while respect earned through integrity is unshakable. 6 months later, Victor completed his parenting classes and was granted unsupervised visitation, as promised in the court order. The divorce that had been finalized 3 years ago remained unchanged, though Victor was now required to pay a more appropriate level of child support based on my actual income disclosure. He never remarried, and he never again questioned my ability to provide for our son. My mother sent me a letter of apology, but I never responded. Some betrayals cut too deep, reveal too much about a person's character, to simply forgive and forget. We maintain minimal contact now, limited to major holidays and family emergencies, which is all I can manage after her betrayal in that courtroom. Oliver now proudly tells his friends that his mom is a judge. He's learned about the importance of justice, fairness, and standing up for what's right. He's also learned that sometimes the people who love you the most can hurt you the deepest, but that doesn't diminish your worth. As for me, I learned that hiding your light doesn't protect you. It just makes it easier for others to underestimate you. I stopped hiding who I was, started being proud of my accomplishments, and taught my son that integrity and hard work are worth celebrating. After the dust settled from the custody battle, I also decided to be more transparent about my career with my colleagues at the court. I requested that Judge Manning be assigned to my son's custody case precisely because she knew me professionally, but would remain impartial, something I arranged through proper legal channels to avoid any appearance of impropriety. The woman who walked into that courtroom feeling attacked and isolated was the same woman who walked out vindicated and strong. The difference wasn't in what I'd achieved. It was in my willingness to finally let others see exactly who I'd always been. Justice, it turns out, isn't just something you serve. Sometimes it's something you claim for yourself. Before you go, here's a quick bonus for sticking around. If you love learning and growing like I do, you need to try audiobooks. I've got an exclusive deal with Audible. Your first month is completely free. That's access to over 500,000 titles, zero cost to you. All the details are waiting in the description. Don't miss this one.